They do not do asphalt tracks anymore. And the reason being is that the asphalt is getting weaker due to improved refining process. So what's left is literally what's at the bottom of the barrel. The refining process is taking out so much more of the good stuff, and what's left behind isn't as pliable, and that's why it cracks more easily. And so they're not even doing asphalt courts anymore. What they're doing is something called a post-tension concrete construction. It's a one piece of concrete that's got rebar and cables through it, and once they pour out the cement, they tighten up, and has something to do with the tension. And so not only will it be just one giant slab that moves all at once, but the tennis posts and the tennis nets are all a piece of that. So the whole thing moves. So you're not going to get this heaving like you do with the asphalt. Warranty on a post-tension concrete is anywhere from 20 to 25 years, and asphalt is 2 to 4 years. The cost from Cape and Island for the post-tension concrete construction was just under $224,000. Maine Tennis and Track gave me a quote for an asphalt, which is replacing what we have with the exact same thing, and their quote was $135,000. And that's with complete fencing and tearing it all up and regrading, and both of those quotes are for that. Tennis is not in this year's budget. We're still completing and funding what's left to do on the track and turf, and I think certainly tennis is the last facility that we haven't had a chance to overhaul or improve yet. So I think that's, as soon as we can, we'll jump right on that. Any questions about the tennis?
You might have already said, did you say how old that tennis court is out there? Like, when was it originally put in?
I'm going to guess 30 years.
And it's asphalt?
It's asphalt.
And it's been resurfaced many times?
It's been resurfaced and the cracks fixed at least twice since I've been here.
What does it cost to do that? When you look at those two, I mean, it's quite a huge difference, but obviously there's a reason. So does it cost a lot to resurface it each time?
$15,000.
Okay, you said that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the cost differential, I should have brought it with me, but they did a comparison, and this is estimates based on every 7 years you have to restripe, and over the course of the life of the post-tension concrete court, when you compared it to the asphalt, they envisioned you would save over $100,000 just in maintenance costs to upkeep the asphalt. But it is more money up front.
But it costs $100,000 more, so
Yep.
time value of money, I guess. Valerie?
So, thank you, Craig. I don't see in the capital plan the tennis courts added within the next few years. So how is this going to work? And the other question is, right now, are we able to safely host tournaments? And are students safe playing on those courts? Because the cracks are getting bigger, and I worry about kids tripping and falling and hurting themselves, and legal action against us or anything else that may happen in addition to them being hurt.
So I can't answer the question about the capital budget. Becky might be able to do that. In my estimation, those courts aren't unsafe. There's not going to, at this point now, I think if we don't do something, eventually it will get that way. But at this point, we're playing on them, and I don't see kids getting hurt because of the cracks. They're not that dramatic yet, but they will be if we don't pay another $15,000. And again, what they do is they come and they scratch out the crack. Then they fill it in, and then it's like mudding and taping your wall. They put a tape down, and then they put mud on top of that, let it dry, and then they just paint over it. So after 2 or 3 years, again, of frost and weather in Maine, that what you just repaired is going to be right back to where it is in 3 or 4 years.
So the follow-up to that was, are we going to resurface them before we replace them? Can we host a tournament? Because I know that when the ball bounces on those courts, it goes in any direction except the direction that you're expecting it to go if it hits one of these cracks, and there are quite a few of them. So are we at the place where we cannot host tournaments?
No, well, we don't host tennis tournaments, we host tennis matches, and, yeah, and we'll be hosting a full slate of home tennis matches this spring.
Home court advantage, I guess, if you know where they are. Jen?
I forgot to ask, so there's 3 courts out there, correct?
We have 3 courts.
So is this a,
Placement of the 3.
okay, so the same size, same
Yeah,
number of courts?
when the original plan to do the whole building and the addition and the track, there was an initial plan to add at least, I can't remember if it was 1 court or 2, and go towards 295, but there was ledge, and to build 2 tennis courts there was more than you could build 5 tennis courts at Hunter Road Field. So,
How many kids do we have in the tennis program?
you're going to test my memory. Last year, girls, 15 came out. We didn't cut. They all stayed. Actually, I'm sorry, they all didn't stay throughout the season. 1 or 2 dropped, but there was at least a dozen on the team. Boys just a little bit under that. 12 is I mean, we got 3 courts. You put 4 on each. 12's kind of the cutoff if you have to, if you have to cut.
So that's kind of the max you'd want, is 12.
Well, you can't put more than 4.
Right.
4 in a court.
Yeah, and then you start. Kate?
So the question about whether or not the tennis court is on the capital plan, I really hope it is, because when this came up 3 or 4 years ago, that was like something that I voiced strongly about getting it put on the capital plan, because the way that this was brought up and paid for was during the budget public hearing process. It was brought up last minute by concerned parents. And so we had to shuffle things around and reprioritize to be able to resurface the tennis courts in place of something else that was on the plan at the time. So I remember distinctly that we said, put the tennis courts on the plan so that we don't end up with this happening ever again. So if you could find out
I'd be
where it
happy
is on
to
the
find
plan.
out. I really don't know if it's on the plan, but I'm happy to check and provide that in the budget update for the next meeting.
Yeah, I don't remember it being on the one that Dennis presented at Pownell. Jen?
I just wanted to add in, I have a kid who plays tennis. It's such a different sport that when you say 12 or 15, it sounds like a really small amount, but tennis is such an odd, different sport that it's not like you can keep rotating kids in. So like having a small team shouldn't, I hope doesn't like sway people to think it's not like a popular sport or it's not an important sport.
Yeah, it's kind of like golf. You can't make subs. I mean, there's no, you go in and take their place and come back out. I mean, you're either playing or you're not playing, and it's kind of like golf. 6
That's why I
play,
don't play
and that's
tennis.
it.
Too much work.
There was another question. Is there any more questions about tennis?
Erica, did you? Lindsay? You good? Okay.
There was a question about the storage facility, and I'm guessing it's the 3-bay garage. So the Region 10 students started construction this fall, and it's my understanding that it'll be complete sometime this spring. So they worked out there this fall, and they had some rainy weather, and it's the four walls are up. So they're moving along with that, and I'm guessing they'll be out there just as soon as the weather allows. There was a question about the Durham girls C team. This year at Durham, neither the boys or the girls had a C team. There weren't enough boys or girls to come out to warrant a 3rd team.
This is basketball?
This is basketball, I'm sorry. In the contract listed at Durham a boys C team, but it didn't list a girls C team. So that's also why. So what we've done is we've removed just the boys and the girls, and now we just list A, B, and C teams. So, and it's whether it's boys or girls, it's That's what we have. So that was why we had to add that last year, or one of the reasons we did. But it's not being funded this year.
I feel like I have a lot of questions. That leads me back to when you said you had 18 on the JV girls basketball, and there's no first team, and there's no graduating seniors, so I'm assuming next year that would be a need
Hopefully.
to have a
Yep.
first team. So would that be something that you'd have to put in the budget or just adjust?
No, it's in the
based on
budget for next year.
numbers? Yeah, I didn't see it on here, but
It's
I,
not an addition, I think it's because it was already in there, it's not an addition of a new team. It's just this year they didn't fund it. The funds were in there if they needed it, but they didn't use it.
Right.
gotcha.
Yeah, so instead of, 18, so there was 12 on varsity, again, you keep kind of 12, which left 18 girls. So we either cut 5, cut 4, cut 3, so we said we'll just keep them all. 18's a lot to get in any one game, 12's a lot to try to get in one game. So what we did was, is we scheduled, I don't know, you might know better than I, 8, 9 first-team games, so that those 18 kids, instead of trying to fit into 18 games, had additional games for the playing time of the kids that didn't get in, because you can't get 18 kids in meaningful minutes in one game.
And 9 and 9 doesn't work. That's too small of a team.
Well,
If you wanted to do a first
5
team.
on 5 is how you play.
Right.
There are drills that you can do with small all or sides, but then you have sicknesses and illness, so 9 becomes 8, becomes 7. So, 18 became.
Then you're back to tennis and playing the whole time again. Sally?
So you thought that covered in the current budget, you don't have to add that, but I'm seeing that with the staffing adjustments to this year, we have, like you say, the FMS indoor track assistant coach and the outdoor track coach. Did you say that you already have that money for those stipends? Because they're listed here as adjustments, but when I go to the budget docs, they're not listed as an
They-
addition.
So they're not in this year's budget, because last spring was the first time we had the track, and last March was the first time we had 55 kids play indoor track. So what we did is we took unused stipends, like the girls' first team basketball, and at Freeport Middle School, we didn't have girls A basketball, and at Durham, we don't have girls C or boys C. So there's some unused stipends that last year we used that we'll again use this year, and hopefully all those stipends will be filled.
Any other questions for Craig? Anything else for us?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
I'm having a bit of trouble just tracking all the, like, what each one of these additions costs. Do we have a list of that?
This page from last time, I think, has all of the,
Well, it wouldn't
it
have
doesn't-
the stipends.
Oh, no, it
Michelle,
doesn't.
I'm looking to you for that one. Where would they most
Well, if we,
easily access that?
if we,
In
so
which
if,
document? Because I
Or-
know we have multiple documents.
yes,
if
so,
we just have a list that already has some of, like that, I don't have the orange paper, but,
yeah. Other than that one?
okay.
Yes.
Why don't I have that paper?
Oh, yeah.
She has plenty. Michelle, would you give her a copy?
So it's in the small orange one, page 5, budget adjustments. I think it might be helpful to have them on, I mean, we can cross-reference these things all day long, but they're sort of set up differently. This is by article, this is by school or department. Maybe for the future ones of these, if we could get the cost impact in the box, that would be helpful.
That's an easy fix.
Okay. Because like the stuff underneath, I mean, the books, the total was there, these things were
Yeah.
there, but,
Happy to do that.
so
No,
like,
When,
so
when the administrators put in their one pager, we'll just include the dollar
the
amount on there.
cost impact.
And also, if it's something that's being shifted, like the stipends are unused, then I saw that as something that was an additional with a fiscal note to the budget, but it didn't for the athletic coaches, for example.
It is though, because
It
next
is.
year it will be, because
Yeah.
we're going to fund those other ones, plus we're going to fund these individually.
But they're not included here.
In the yellow sheet?
Right.
And the, okay,
Yeah.
yep, go ahead.
I was going for big dollars, and so I was going for anything that was more than somewhere in the neighborhood of $4,000 to $5,000 is what I was putting in here. So a
Okay.
$1,500 stipend, I didn't feel like
Okay.
needed to be in there. But
Good
if
to
you
know.
would like, I mean, if you want me to adjust that number, I can certainly do that. I was just trying not to make it really, really long because,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, even the textbooks for Jen, to add those in, that was a couple $1,000s too. But, you know, do you want me to add that? You know, it becomes a very long list at that point.
Now
So
that
you
I
just
know
let me
that
know.
you're not including them, it's okay.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to add them all. I just was trying to,
Match them up.
yeah.
Right, yeah, particularly if there's some that didn't make it onto this sheet, we probably want to have them on the individual presenter sheets. All right. So hopefully Jen got a glass of water and ready to go again. Oh. Did you get water, Jen?
Bring my water. I know, I'm still sick, which is just amazing from the last time I was here. I have one addition to the program of studies, and I also have one of our wonderful teachers, leadership team members, and department chair, Tim Gravois, who he is the head of the social studies department, so he's going to join me in just a minute when we get kind of towards the end of the program of studies. So, Candy, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you this if you just pass them. It's just one more description to a class that's being added that didn't make it in time for the printing. So you have the page in front of you that outlines the changes. One suggestion that we got, I think it was from Kate, was to maybe strike out the language that we used in years past and what's been new. Which is good feedback. I think just to warn you, it will make it longer, but that's okay. I think it won't make it much longer. So we're really proud of our school profile. We went to a school visit yesterday where at Bonnie Eagle High School with there were about 20 other high schools and middle schools that were present and shared our program of, our student profile, school profile. And just as a reminder, this is what goes out to all colleges and universities to let them know about our school. And so this is a document that Great Schools Partnership helped us make a lot more kind of visually friendly. And other schools have been very excited to see this and are now trying to copy ours. But so we've updated that, so you'll see that as one of the changes. I would say in the beginning of the program of studies from this year to last year, a major change I've noted from page 10 to 14 is that we have taken out all of the language of the law, which was quite a bit, 4 pages of describing the proficiency law. And so it was outlining what our practices were for different grade levels. And so we have completely removed that from the program of studies with the change in the law. And then one other thing is that now all of our students, we're starting to get to a place, not the 1920 school year, but the 2021 school year is when all 4 grades will operate on the same systems, which we're looking forward to that. So this will be the last year that just the seniors will operate. Some things will be slightly different, but one thing that is the same is that it will be the policy of 24 credits is for all students and for this coming school year. The other thing that's common that has been really helpful is that all grades 9 through 12 will be alphabetical for their guidance counselor. It's easier for kids to remember, parents to remember, teachers to remember. So that will be the first time that happens next year. Page 22, 23, we took off the 4.0 scale conversion. It was next to the 100-point scale. At this school, we don't report to kids like that. They don't get a grade point average per class. The only thing that that was used for was a conversion that was sent to colleges. And feedback from colleges is they do their own conversion, and they do it very differently from school to school. So there wasn't purpose in that, and that's not something that our students use for information. So then page 25, one of the things that we've discussed is, we're really trying to have our students understand kind of the power of working on improving their habits of work and how it impacts things. So as I've presented before, it's connected to eligibility, it's connected to student recognition, and we are also including it as a piece of data to look at honors classes, to look at how students are doing with their habits of work. So a student who is demonstrating that they are actively trying to push their own learning is something that we think would be helpful as a piece of criteria there. On page 26 and 27, which then later comes into page 36, around that area for the math department, there were some changes to course names. One is we took last year Algebra 1, Part 1 and Part 2, and we have combined that into a new class called Applied Algebra, with the hopes that we are still providing extended support for students who are struggling in algebra, but it's a one-year class that meets every day instead of taking algebra every other day for 2 years, hoping to reduce the gap of the students and not have them in algebra for 2 years. We also changed the name Consumer Math. That's quantitative reasoning. For those of you who were here last year, that was the class that I presented that is in connection with Southern Maine Community College. That's where they get the dual enrollment credit, and quantitative reasoning is their name. So that is not optional. We use that title because we follow the SMCC curriculum and syllabus, and it is very similar to consumer math. Some people call it life math. And then for science, which is also explained on page 40, that's the largest change to the program of studies for the science department is the addition of the class called Chemistry in the Community. So that connects to what I was talking about in the budget conversation this evening of our goal is to have students experience all standards in science. And the way that our progression is right now is that currently, particularly our juniors and seniors, could potentially skip an entire section of those NGSS standards. So they may have just taken a life science path and never experienced physical sciences. And so one thing we considered was pushing every student to take chemistry and physics based on research of the last years of how many students take chemistry and physics, both of those classes. If you are what I would say a middle of the road science student, not somebody who's necessarily going to pursue science in college, that's a really small percentage. There's around 11% of our students who do that. And so we were worried about going from 11% to saying 100% of our students need to take both physics and chemistry. And so Chemistry in the Community is a class that will address the physical science standards. So it kind of dips into both physics and chemistry. And so if students are taking Earth System Science as a 9th grader, biology as a 10th grader, chemistry in the community as an 11th grader, and then there's a variety of options as a 12th grader. When we looked at the NGSS standards, they will then have experienced all the different facets of those standards, which we feel like sets them up on a great path for if they want to take college classes that are tied to any of the sciences. They will have some sort of background, and there's still going to be a variety of choices that they have. And some students who are interested in science double up with more than one. So they might take physics and also take environmental or an AP class or one of our STEM offerings. In ELA, Last year I spoke about that we decided not to offer our focus classes. Those were kind of sub-separate small classes that combined ELA and social studies support. What we have done is those students are now in an ELA 9 class, in a social studies class, and then in addition, they either have a literacy support class or what we call humanities skills, which is working on executive functioning skills. That was input from both Ray and Will about talking about kind of parsing out the needs of our students, so that they had additional support while also being in grade level classes for their 9th and 10th grade classes. One thing that you'll see is the addition of humanities skills 9 and 10, and then down on page 36, math support and math fundamentals. We wrestled with whether to put those in the program of studies because those are not classes that kids are able to choose. Those are intervention classes that we place them in. But feedback from teachers was we feel like it gives some legitimacy to the class and makes the kids really clear on what the purpose is. This isn't a punishment. This is a support class. And so we decided to add those into the program of studies. On page 33 for our PE classes, we've added a new class this year called individual sports. And so our PE department does a fantastic job of trying to really address different kinds of needs of different kinds of kids. So we have a class that is geared towards kids who are interested in competitive sports, team sports playing against each other. We have another class that is collaborative, non-competitive games is how they would describe it. And then this is really about more individual, really non-collaborative things that kids are still going to do in the class, but really focused on their own wellness. Kids who are not interested in team sport, team games. And outdoor fitness has moved to level 2. We found that some of our level 1 students, 9th graders predominantly, weren't totally clear on what they had signed up for, that you were actually going to go hiking in the outdoor fitness class. And so thought that that might be more appropriate for the level 2 class where they're really clear on what that class is, that it's a pretty rigorous PE class. Their summative assessment is a hike up one of the mountains that's near here. So we shifted just the levels of that. And then I'll actually come back to where it says page 44 in social studies because I'd love to have Tim Gravois come up and share a little bit of the work that the social studies department has done. So I'll skip a little bit to page 49. For performing arts, we removed the class that was called creative drama. It was something that we just offered last year and unfortunately did not have sufficient enrollment. But the small piece of paper, we are really excited about the addition of this class. As I'm sure you've heard, we have unified basketball in the school, which has been a really just wonderful addition to our school community where kids with significant physical or emotional or academic special needs are paired with mentor students and they're playing basketball together. Then from there we morphed into a unified PE class that we offer during the day, which is the same setup. And then from there, Natalie Safley and Kimberly Metzger-Mahalik from the Performing and Visual Arts Department came up with the idea of offering a theater arts class that would be unified. And so we think that this will be a great opportunity for our special education and general education students to work together in this class. And then finally, Region 10 has added their pre-engineering program. That's actually being offered this year. They didn't get the funding for that until about the middle of the summer last year, 2018. So that was offered this year. We had meetings with students, but it wasn't in the program of studies. So we've now added that. Region 10 is excited about that program and hoping that they can expand that for next year. So Tim, if you don't mind coming up. So we have made some changes in our social studies department, particularly in the 10th grade, and Tim's going to talk a little bit about how those changes came about.
Hey everybody. So we have had for longer than I've been here, and this is my 6th year, we have what we like to call a traditional curriculum in the social studies department. And over the last, I would say, 4 years, the work we've been doing around proficiency-based education, it's become clear that the proficiency setup and the instructing and assessing of skills is not particularly aligned with a very traditional social studies curriculum. And so I couldn't actually tell you the original design of our global studies, Western studies, and then at the time American studies progression. It predates almost everybody in the department. So as a result, we have been, over the past few years, looking at that progression and trying to figure out what would be the class and course offerings that we could provide to students that would both align with sort of more modern expectations for social studies education and also provide a more authentic, realistic application of the skills so that what we're instructing and assessing aligns with the progression of the courses and it isn't just based on what happened in this time period and the circumstances of it, and that just moved slowly through history. So what we're proposing in the program of studies is that we remove, starting with 10th grade, and this would be the kind of opening and examination of the 9th to 10th progression, starting with the 10th grade, eliminating the course that we now call Western Studies, which is essentially a Western Civ survey course, and breaking that up into 2 semester courses. They'd both still be required. One would be American Government and Economics, and the rationale behind that is that giving students a civics education earlier on would prepare them for the study of American history in a much more meaningful way. And secondly, there is an economics standard. As of yet, that economic standard has not been a true part of our progression. We have offered an elective in economics, but students could theoretically graduate Freeport High School having not met the economic standard because it wasn't a direct part of any of our course progression. So that would address that, what we see as a pretty significant loophole. The other course would be called Modern World Conflict, which would allow students to grapple with the 20th century and the conflicts that come about and really get a better sense of globalization. As of now, in the 10th grade course, students essentially get to wrestle with the World War I, World War II, Cold War progression at the end of the year in a very short amount of time. And it's sort of like a brief survey of some really significant events that shape modern society. And we don't feel like we've, as of late, done a service to the perspective that could offer students. And so we also feel like this opportunity would give us the chance to create those courses in a way that is a skills progression, and then build the lead up to the 11th grade year, where they do have some choice at this point. If you recall that we did add AP US History, and some students are choosing to take that as juniors, we want to make sure that whatever students are taking in the 11th grade, they have the strong civics base and the modern perspective for whichever one of those courses that they choose. It does mean that certain content that we have taught for years and years will either be shuffled or not kind of examined. So that does mean that we have to also look at what we're doing in 9th grade and making sure that we're examining the world history that we want to. We have wrestled with that, and we feel like this is still the best option, knowing that some of that content will be lost. Particularly, we're one of the few remaining schools that still kind of does a full survey of ancient Greece and Rome. We're not saying that that would never come up in our progression, but we're saying that we probably wouldn't spend an entire, third of the year doing that, which we have since longer I've been here. So those would be the major changes. Be happy to answer specific questions about the rationale there, if anybody has them. Ollie?
So Tim, when you looked at the 9th grade, did you decide not to do anything this year but re-examine next year what to do with global studies, or global studies will stay as is for the foreseeable future?
So for next year, we feel like we cannot between now and next fall, rebuild 2 entire years worth of the curriculum. I think, and Jen and I have spoken about this, as has the department. We have used that additional time so far to reach some of these conclusions and have these discussions. We would like to examine the 9-10 progression in its entirety. We just feel like the 10th grade is the highest leverage point right now, and that's the work that would kind of energize us and also prepare students who are coming through. We've already made those changes in the 11th grade, so we could absolutely, see some positive results from that in the short term if we were able to make that change for next fall. It doesn't mean we would be ignoring the 9th grade progression. It would just be, once we could get a new progression built, then we would look at 9th grade.
So in looking on page 27 with the sequencing, this may be really dating myself, but I thought it was U.S. history was a requirement of graduation for.
U.S. history absolutely is a requirement. Yeah.
So I'm looking at option 2, global studies, modern world, and then AP U.S. history or world, and then in 12th could be an elective AP. So they have to choose.
So when they're juniors, they would definitely have to take either American history or AP US history. As an elective, when they're in 11th through 12th grader, they can absolutely take AP World History. They could also, and it's actually the College Board's recommendation is that you actually take a full American history class prior to taking the AP US history class because the content's so rigorous.
This could be just the way I'm reading option 2 really lends itself to have somebody think that they could escape U.S. history.
Yeah,
The way it's written, it
I'm
looks
sorry,
that
could
way,
you
for
clarify
sure.
where I'm looking
So
at?
page 27,
Because it's all ors, U.S. history
yeah,
or
option
world
2.
history. You're like, all right, I'm going to take world history.
Right. So I
and then
think-
I'm going to take an elective in the 12th.
right, I just feel like, if I'm using my own kid, she's taking global studies, then next year that, and then she's like, oh, I'm going to take world history, and then the following year, oh, I'm going to take some elective.
Sure, that's absolutely an oversight.
Yeah, so I just think, would they be able to choose American history in option 2 would be, what would,
Yeah, they actually,
Okay.
guidance, we'll catch that right now.
Yeah,
Guidance
oh.
would have caught it. That's an oversight. That's not
okay.
accurate. That's not an
'Cause
option for students.
Then I'm
Yeah.
not dating myself, it's still required?
No, that is accurate, yep.
So I think your assessment of the scope of what you guys are covering and so much, it clearly rings true because Ray here was nodding vigorously about so much how quickly you go through such a big portion of our history at the end of a period. So I appreciate your guys' work on that. Maddie did have one question on this one, on the social studies. I think you talked a little bit about the offerings. Her question was around differentiation and variety through all 4 years. Social studies
Yeah.
offers 8.5 credits compared to the other ones who offer more in the other content areas. And mostly it sounds like the honors option offered in 9th and 10th grade seems to be limited to just a project.
Sure. So I'll speak to the differentiation piece first. We don't view sort of total credits as a mark of that. In fact, if you look at our elective offerings, we offer the most electives out of any of the course areas. That credit disparity comes from the fact that science classes have labs attached to them in many cases, an extra 0.5 credit attached to them. And so when you add up the total offerings, plus there are also more AP classes attached to the science curriculum, then there are actually really only 2 mainstream that sort of fit our progression. And yeah, of course, Jen.
Just add to that, we listed in the program of studies, we don't have intervention classes listed under social studies. The intervention class there would be what we call humanities skills or literacy, which are listed underneath ELA. And so in the math department and in the ELA department, that's another impact on the number of credits. So I understand Maddie's question. It's just not a way that we look at, kind of the how we're expanding course offerings, who they're offered to, because there's so many nuances to either support classes or labs, like Tim said.
And so kind of thinking about the honors progression, it's an issue that we absolutely discuss regularly, and we have devoted department time to it this year. We kind of have a few different areas that we have discussed at length to build our position of not having specific honors classes at the 9 and 10 level. I'll come back to those in a second. At the 11th grade level, we would argue that we do now have that sort of discrete, separate option for 11th graders looking to fulfill that American history requirement. Students who are, of a certain mindset and want to really push themselves could take AP US History as an 11th grader. So at that point, we do feel like we have those course offerings. Plus, it's pretty clear if you look at the average student schedule, like many 11th and 12th grade students are filling their schedules with social studies electives. So we do have many course offerings. One of the areas that we absolutely are going to start looking at, and I think the criticism is valid, is how do we get more underclassmen into those electives? We are currently, is only a small number of those classes open to underclassmen. That is an area that we're going to specifically try and improve on. As far as having honors courses, not having honors courses in the 9-10 progression, we have talked at length because we actually really value the idea of heterogeneity in those two courses. One of the questions spoke that social studies is the only core subject area, and I don't know if core is the right term, but that doesn't have those separate honors sections. And there is a rationale there. The first being social studies education, we feel, lends itself to heterogeneity. We are really cautious now more than ever of creating groups of students that are getting the same perspective throughout their education. And I think now, through virtue of having separate level classes, it is feasible that the only areas where students are getting some of the diversity would be in social studies, performing arts, and health and PE. So we really value that as a part of our progression. The second thing is the research. I think the research about heterogeneous grouping is that there are definitely pros and cons. There seem to be more pros than cons. But one of the pros to homogeneous grouping is that it's easier on teachers, and we have wrestled with that. It does make planning certainly easier. You don't have to necessarily build as much differentiation into content planning, but we think it is a valuable experience that students are getting at Freeport High School specifically for that other perspective. I'm lucky enough to serve in the capacity on extracurricular as an advisor, so I have the RSVP Club and the Model UN team, and full disclosure, I regularly use those as my focus groups for things that we're working on, and many of our highest achieving students can sort of describe the experience of getting to a group of people, and you've had the same classes, same perspectives with this particular group for, in some cases, 10 or 12 years. And I think the social studies classes are a place where you're getting fresh perspective, because you're going to have those classes with, especially in 9th and 10th grade, when you're getting to know a new community, you're going to have those classes with people you don't know, which we really think is a strength. There are certain students that the only mainstream classes in 9th and 10th grade that they're taking are social studies classes, and we view that as a strength.
Jen?
I would agree. I think that we would be doing a huge disservice to our students if we started looking at making all of the courses available at the honors level. I think that exactly what you said is so important. And I just think that I appreciate that you guys are doing this work and not, because I'm sure there's pressure, in different directions to kind of follow that path. And I think it's nice that you guys have thought about it and have come to the conclusion that it's not going to work, right now.
Valerie?
I appreciate that explanation. It's really great to hear you say that. I do hear from parents that they are hoping that at some point there'll be more rigor in the social studies classes, and I appreciate what you said about differentiating more within the classroom. I wonder how much that happens and whether it's enough to basically satisfy the desire of some kids who want to be more challenged. Because it is true that the honors option is not nearly as rigorous as an honors class. And for some students, that is an asset that they would like to have access to.
So I think our sort of view in the 9-10 progression specifically is that by re-examining what we're doing, we can address that as an issue. I think the honors option in the forms it's taken is again something that predates many of us. It has had several different affiliations throughout its history of being affiliated with National History Day. Different teachers have been in charge of it. It's been designed and redesigned. We think if we now start this work of really examining what we do 9-10, we can address some of those concerns directly through the curriculum without losing the heterogeneity. The other thing about the sort of honors delineation is that we have spent years now like getting the standards to a place that we really like and the indicators to a place that we really like, the learning targets underneath them. And we think that students in a fresh progression 9-10 will have the opportunity to push themselves, demonstrate the sort of mastery that a curriculum designed with those as a starting point rather than a curriculum where those are being placed over pre-existing content will be that reform and sort of that modernization of the curriculum that will address those student needs.
That sounds great. What I kind of got the impression from earlier in your talk that you were focusing on revising the 11th and 12th grade classes first. I mean, maybe that was a misconception of what you said. So I'm just kind of interested in the timing of what you just laid out. So when would those changes effectively take place in the 9-10 grades with assurance of more consistent rigor throughout the daily programming of those classes?
So we don't have a 12th grade requirement in social studies. Seniors often fill their schedules with social studies electives to meet their graduation requirement of elective credit. In the 11th grade, we already have transitioned to they have to take American history in some form. They could take American history at what we would call a CP level, or they could take AP US history. There's also the AP World History class, which does not fulfill the specific requirement of 11th grade, but you could take it as an 11th grader or a 12th grader. Our work, and is actually already in process, we obviously are hoping to approve the program of studies, but it's something we're all thinking about, would be addressing the 10th grade curriculum in the rest of this year to start those brand new progression in the fall. And then while we're teaching those new classes and obviously testing them, making modifications, we would then next year start the process of addressing the 9th grade curriculum.
So essentially starting at the top and moving back. You started with 11th, your 10th will be next year, and then presumably 9th would be the following year.
Correct.
So just to add on to that, one of the things is last year was the year that we decided to change how we were doing American Studies in 11th grade. That's where all 11th graders were required to take American Studies, which was ELA and Social Studies combined. So that was one major shift last year, and the addition of AP US, which we did not offer. So those were kind of the first. That was the first changes that we implemented in recent years. I do also want to say that, because I'm going to brag for Tim and his department and for the ELA department, it's not something that they're waiting on right now. They did this outstanding unit this year that they had never taught before, that they did interdisciplinary between all the ELA and social studies 9th grade teachers, where they read a graphic novel that's called Persepolis. And I run the cafeteria study hall that happens during advisory, and every student was like, it's okay, or good. I was like, oh my gosh. About a text, okay, wonderful. But the summative that they did was they took the social studies and ELA ninth grade classes, mixed and matched. I don't know how they did the logistics of it. I was able to go and see 3 different versions of this, where they did a Socratic seminar where the kids needed to use textual evidence, and they had some really challenging questions that either related to the text or related to the history of Iran. I have not read it. That's my summer reading. And I think it was outstanding for kids. It was just an unbelievable demonstration of collaboration between these 2 departments. So they're not waiting, per se, to examine what they're doing. This was something that they felt passionate about. They used time in the summer to get it started. They used whatever time they could find after school and put it together in place. And I think it was just an outstanding experience for kids. So I think it's constantly going to be happening, plus that big picture view of what we're offering in that class. The other thing is 9th grade world history is very common in other schools. That is probably the most common 9th grade class. So it's not about would we change what the focus is, probably. It's more about what are we focusing on in that class, because that's such a massive potential of curriculum.
I am really happy to hear about that interdisciplinary program, because I think one of the, for me anyway, the change in the 11th grade when you did separate that ELA and social studies class was, I thought that was an unusual offering relative to other schools, and I like the overlay together. So I'm glad to hear, though, even though those 2 separated, you guys are finding ways to synchronize those 2 groups, so I think it's great. Valerie?
And I'd like to make a comment that if you modernize and increase the differentiation at the same time, it will be a perfect seamless transition to what I'm talking about, and I have full trust that your department can do it.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah.
I have a question, but it's not social studies related.
All right, good luck, Jen.
You can try and answer if you want.
I lost my place here, but there was a table in the beginning that shows the bands, the grading bands. Where thought my finger was full. 22.
Yep, grading system.
How do you read that table?
So this was the one that had the 4.0 conversion that was attached that we used to use to provide to colleges. And so we're not a school that puts an A minus, a B. So, and this is only for the class of 2020, because the ranges for the grade levels below them are the ones that we've implemented this year when we shifted back from the 1 to 4 to the 0 to 100. So really, this is the 93 to 100 would be what some schools would consider that A range. And then 85 to 92 would be similar to a B range, but we don't use letters here. And then down at the bottom, there are we left it because we wanted people to understand what might be coded on a transcript. So, for example, a high pass that is only used rarely, an example of that would be Moore Street. So for students who do some work on top of going to Moore Street, where they're submitting some reflections on their experience, maybe some research that's tied to it, then on their transcript they would receive a high pass. So we debated to take this whole chart out, but felt like some of those, especially like no credit or withdraw, making sure that people knew what that meant if that's present on a transcript.
Yeah, it doesn't really, I mean, you know, the replacement for the upcoming years, okay, beginning, develop, okay, I think it doesn't tell you anything. Just grade point value.
Right.
Yeah, I think I understand that bottom half because you're going to get like an abbreviation, right? And so you want people to know what the, honors, high pass. From there down, I understand it.
Yeah.
The first half of it.
We could take that off completely too.
It's very confusing to
Yeah.
me, I thought.
I mean, people will probably just input their own A, B, like.
Yeah. And so, like I said, right next to it was like 3.72 to 4.0, but we felt like that was almost false information because it depends on the school where you go that might not be the case. That might not be the correct conversion. So we could, if people think it's more helpful to just take it out, really how kids might use that. Rhea, you might be able to chime in too on that and what you think, but really that would be honor roll would be the cutoff. High honor roll would be 93. Honor roll would be 85, or privileges to go off campus, things like that. But we don't equate it to a letter.
If we keep it in there and you're thinking kids would, or students would be using it that way, I would just recommend adding another column that says, aligns it with honor roll.
Well, it says it
somehow.
right below, honor roll, and then it gives you high honors is 93 or better, and honors is 85 or higher.
Where's it?
If you
Oh,
keep
on the
reading
next
down below,
page. Okay.
in the.
Yeah, I don't know. Or just make it 0 to 100. If that's what the point of it was, is to just say we're on a 100-point scale.
Yeah.
That was just one question. And then the other question was, you had mentioned the quantitative reasoning as being a dual enrollment. Do we flag the dual enrollment classes in here, so when you're looking through the course of study, you know which ones are dual enrollment?
We haven't because that's a great question. We're wrestling with that a little bit because you have to meet SMCC's requirements. So quantitative reasoning is a class that we offer for all of our students, but you only get the dual enrollment credit if you apply for it and if you meet their criteria. So unfortunately, some kids wanted to get the dual credit, but it's based on SAT scores. They also were able to retake the AccuPlacer. And so we have shared that information about dual enrollment student to student. But it is a great question of how are we doing a better job of advertising, hey, you really want to sign up for this class because if you meet this criteria, then you would potentially get college credit. How we attacked that last year was going student to student, and we held meetings and we pulled them in and gave them information about it. But it's certainly something we could flag in here too.
I think that would be a great idea.
Yeah, you could do
even
that.
if you put eligibility requirements must be met, asterisks it or something, but at least at least people can go and say, okay, at least I know I have the option or the potential to get it in this class.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
The alternative, I guess, would be in the back where you have the alternative additional academic opportunities. Is dual enrollment listed here, or is that the same as early? That's not the same as early study at USM, is it?
No, that's not the same.
So I guess the alternative to just flagging the individual courses would be to have in the back
Add
here
it there.
dual enrollment, and then you could list the classes that qualify, and you could explain there that, it's subject to, prerequisites
Yeah.
or meeting the requirements of the program.
Yeah, we could definitely. I think it actually would work to do both things: flag it in the math section, and then also put it in additional academic, because we have those descriptions. We just haven't included them in here.
Unless it's somewhere else, it might also be useful to have the description of the extracurriculars. I saw them all listed out, but is there a separate place where that's, like, they're all summarized in one?
In our
place?
student handbook.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
great.
So this is going back to science and sustainability and the new earth science. Have we lost the piece about sustainability in the transition to the earth sciences class?
No, it's included. One of the things that we're working with that I would say a challenge that I didn't mention at the beginning is always pacing with a brand new class of having, it's a hard challenge for the teachers to anticipate which are the sections that kids are going to remember the things from 7th grade and cruise right through it. And so it's part of the curriculum of our systems. And we're just, this year is going to be a balance of where are we spending our time. So it's in the book, it's in the text that we are hoping to adopt. I think we just need to, at the end of this year and throughout this year, is do some reflection on what are the highest leverage points that we want to make sure that we reach. Because, right, again, Earth systems is kind of like world history, so it's all about like, what do we zoom in that we think is the highest leverage units, because it's just not possible to teach them all in that grade level.
So is the sustainability piece integrated into each of the components of the Earth systems, or is
No.
it its own, whatever, chapter at the end of the book?
It's not necessarily at the end of the book. I'm not familiar with the book enough yet to know where it is, but I know, for example, they started with space, so they're not talking. They're talking about the creation of stars and planets, and they don't get into sustainability there. The other piece is that in our we offer environmental science and AP environmental science, and so if students choose to go that route, then they're doing a ton of work on sustainability. So I think that when we're looking at that 4-year progression, those two classes are going to help us to guide to say, what do we have to do in the 9th grade to make sure that they have some background knowledge to go into those classes.
Yeah, and also to ensure that the kids who do not take environmental science later because it's an elective, at least have the basics of how to care for
the Earth.
The Earth
Yes.
that they're learning so much about.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, my speaker's already in. Hopefully you enjoyed my sound of my breathing for the last 15 minutes. I would just like to add my support for changing. This table was in the grading system, going back to that conversation. I did get really tripped up reading that, because the bands, I just think it would be wise to get rid of the table, because it seems to be adding more confusion, and then just narratively say what you need to say.
Okay.
Especially because the bands are different for the honor roll than they are for the proficiency stuff, and so you're like, well, which band are we talking about when, and it just seems to be kind of convoluted. But if you just got rid of the chart and explained what you need to, because I think the honors and high pass and merit and the things in the bottom, those are like, some classes don't have a 0 to 100, and they use, so you could just say that in a sentence,
Okay.
and I would kind of eliminate that, the whole band's confusion.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen, we just noticed on page 7, under curriculum, that there is still a sentence in there about the class of 2021 will be the first to earn a proficiency-based diploma.
Oh, thank you.
So
that catch.
just,
That's a great catch.
Yes, that was Michelle.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle.
So we want to
And
change
it's
that.
amazing how many people have had eyes on this.
I know,
So,
I know.
Thank you. No, we appreciate that. We'll change that.
Right, don't have anything on. Any other questions on the program of studies? Oh, Jen.
I just have a quick comment, just to go back, the school profile, I think you kind of touched on that, but I think that, that looks fantastic, and I know that, after putting one kid through that whole process, like, you kind of really start to understand how important that is when you are, going through the college, process with your kids, and I think it looks, fantastic. I think we should be really proud of it.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Oh, before you run away.
The school profile, it does say, is it 2018, 2019? Do you update that every year, or is that just? when
So
you
we do
wrote-
it from the year before.
Okay.
So that, because it's the demographics for the year prior. So that was confusing to a few people.
Jen, before you.
It's just a comment. I just wanted to not have anyone walk away without saying, I think the continuing adding of the unified is awesome. Awesome.
Great, thank you.
We'll be happy that we did it to Jen as well as having making him keep coming back. Okay, so 13B, consideration and approval of the charge for the Sustainability Advisory Committee.
Yes, this is the request that you guys had about a month ago to kind of put this committee together. So this is my kind of first attempt, and I'm open to feedback about, any thoughts you might have about it.
I was really pleased when I read it. I was kind of like, right on, go.
Okay, great.
That's my feedback.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, great job. Thank you so much for doing this research and putting it together for us. I do have a question. Do we need to have the meetings and the information about sending the application on the charge itself? What if meetings change?
I know, but it's just the template I've used from what we've used before, and so I'm happy. I think what Jenny does once you approve it is she sends it out, and if we don't have it on there, that's going to be the first questions, right? But I mean, you bring up a really good point in that on the strategic planning, we've had to add a lot of meetings, for example. I don't know if there's a way that we can word it to say.
It says additional meetings may be scheduled as needed.
Okay, all right.
Just maybe?
Yeah.
Instead of will be.
Well, I think that is going to be the first meeting,
You could just say the initial monthly.
the initial first meeting.
Right.
Yes, okay. That, I think, will fix.
And then the other question I had was on the decision-making consideration.
Yes.
Striving to build consensus, obviously, it's the best thing you can hope for. If there is ever a situation where consensus is not arrived at, then how are issues resolved? By majority vote, or how do people?
Well, I think that's why we put the last line, final authority for all decisions relating to the plan rest with the RSU 5 Board of Directors. And I do believe that on most of our committees, we do try to build consensus, and when we can't, we usually bring it here.
So you bring both sides of the issue to the board?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Kate,
In the committee charge where I guess it's all one sentence. It says, strengthen the sustainability of RSU 5 operations, facilities, and educational services. Did you mean for educational services to include like programming, academic programming?
Right, because I think there is, and I think we're doing it. I think we can always expand, but like the recycling, and we have composting going on at the high school right now, and I think Jen just sent me something, and I'll try to put it into a board update about just some latest statistics about how much composting we're doing. And I just think that all of those are opportunities for learning, and I was trying to capture that. I didn't want to leave the learning piece out.
Yeah, I think that's important.
There could have been a better.
Yeah, I'm
There
wondering
it could be,
there's
I'm
a
open
better-
to any revision. It was just kind of my first attempt.
When I first read it, it struck me more as like the delivering of content and education, and not so much curriculum and engaging the students.
Right. So I don't mind going back and taking another stab at it, but I'm not good at wordsmithing in the moment. Yeah, that's hard for me.
And we can probably still approve and
Yeah.
continue, and you just go and find some other way to express the.
any other comments? The membership, anybody have any thoughts on the makeup? We kind of had to put in numbers, and obviously it'll depend on how, what we get for folks interested, but. All right, so I would entertain a motion. Lindsay? Jen? Any other discussions, comments, questions? You guys can submit your applications for the committee once Ginny sends this out. All those in favor? None opposed? Thank you. Personnel, we don't have anything on the agenda for this evening. We're back to public comment again. Even fewer people in the audience now. Okay, so then I would take a motion to enter into executive session as outlined in 1 MRSA Section 4056A for the purpose of discussing the superintendent's evaluation performance goals. Vali, Jen, all those in favor?